Welcome to Franklin Covey's C-Suite Conversations. My name's Patrick Ledden, and each week I have the opportunity to sit down and to talk to an executive leader. Today I'm joined by Howard Friedman, the CEO of Utz Brands. Utz Brands is known around the world. They sell over $1.5 billion worth of snacks every year that, as they say, families can enjoy together. You're going to enjoy this conversation, I can tell you that much. In fact, you might want to grab something to write with, sit down and take some notes as Howard and I talk about his career and what he's learned along the way. Howard Friedman, welcome to C-Suite Conversations.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you here, my friend. In full disclosure to the audience, I've known Howard for quite a long time. Our careers intersected many, many years ago, a couple decades ago. But folks listening in, Howard, or watching this may not know that much about you, although they should. They certainly will in the next 30 minutes or so. But if you wouldn't mind, if you could dial back a couple years, maybe back to maybe about the time we knew each other, and
Sure.
tell how your career unfolded.
Yeah, I always tell people I had slightly shorter hair, but was much thinner when I first met you. I guess it would have been 1996 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I had spent about 5 years in the Army. Was a transportation logistics officer, and had gone ROTC. My parents were school teachers, and so my parents' story was, State University in New York, or you go figure it out. And so I did what any nice Jewish kid would do from the North Shore of Long Island, and I joined the military, ROTC, and broke my mother's heart. So 5.5 years in the Army, stationed in Korea, and then at Bragg where we met. And then I got out through an executive recruiting firm that I had worked with, who basically does an interview conference. And after a couple of days, I had the opportunity to go work for Kraft Foods. And I started in brand management, I guess in 1997, and then spent the next, which seems absurd, 21 years in brand management, basically doing everything from working in the cereal business to culminating my experience running the refrigerated, which was the meat and dairy division of Kraft Heinz, and done a whole variety of marketing and sales jobs along that way, and actually got to the point where when you're in consumer goods, at some point you have to make a different choice if you want to continue to see your career progress. And I made that decision. I joined a company called Post Holdings, which owns things like Post Cereal, Michael Foods, which basically is think about it as egg products. So those egg patties that you'll buy at a sandwich at a quick serve restaurant, as well as Bob Evans, which is the refrigerated sides business, and then a couple of other businesses, Bellring Brands, which is really premier protein. Spent about almost 4 years there as chief operating officer and CEO of cereal, and then the COO of the holding company, and really wanted to get back to running and owning a business. And at that point, I was given the opportunity to interview for and was selected to be the CEO of Utz Brands. For those people who don't know Utz, we're about $1.5 billion salty snack business, headquartered in what we call Snacktown, USA, which is Hanover, Pennsylvania, known for a shocking number of the snack food companies that are around the country.
I'm curious, why is that? Why are there so many there in that part of the country?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can tell you specifically, but what I can tell you is a couple of things. First of all, Hanover was named for Hanover, Germany, and so if you think about the immigration at the time, there were people of German descent had come there, and that naturally lent itself to some of the snack foods. And then proximity to New York, where the potato crops had been coming from, and so pretzels and potato chips sort of evolved from there. Our company was started by Bill and Sally Utz in their kitchen, where they would actually fry potato chips and sell them at local farmers markets, and kind of grew from there. And a couple of years later, here we are.
That's wild. Starting from the kitchen, becoming $1.5 billion business, and then you having the stewardship really over that legacy right now is pretty incredible. Take me back to the point where when you left the military and you went to Kraft and you just got into the space around brands. What was it that attracted you to that? Because there's listeners to this podcast or watching us right now who are maybe they're earlier on in their career, and maybe they're just thinking a little bit about consumer packaged goods or working in the brand space. What was it that drew you to that? And what would you say to them if they were considering it?
Yeah, it was funny because, as you recall, when you went through the same experience, you get a very wide diversity of job roles and experiences, everything from sales to manufacturing, logistics, and supply chain. And I'd come out of the Army as a logistician, And one of the things that I knew as I was getting out is for good and for and evil, I really do like being sort of in the center of where decisions get made, where things are sorted out, where the puzzle is really solved. And then, as for most of my life, I've been fortunate enough that people have been willing to, follow me in sort of positive pursuits. Leadership is something that you get to learn early in your career in the military, but usually it happens long before then. And so for me, brand management was sort of the perfect combination of, it was sort of the center of how a business gets run. You're responsible for basically how you can create the demand, and then really you're at the hub of the wheel. And so things like supply chain and logistics, marketing and communication, as well as where the financials live, you really learn early how a complete business gets run. And so that was a nice way to learn how the puzzle gets solved, and also have the influence and the leadership accountability for the team to see if we can meet and exceed our goals together. And it was really a little bit of an act of serendipity, right? I would love to tell you that I was super insightful and new at the time, but it was the kind of thing that when I got to the job and as I started to see how businesses really run, it felt like this was where I belonged. And it's not always sunshine and roses, but for the most part, I think most of us like the responsibility that comes with leadership and accountability.
Yeah, I'm interested about that accountability piece, and you specifically mentioned the word goals. What have you learned about goal setting, and how have you brought that into your role today?
Yeah, well, and it's funny, there's all sorts of different approaches to goals, right? But at the end of the day, there are a couple of things that I know to be true. A goal is basically who's going to do what to whom and by when, and then how does it fit into the overall organizational responsibility. And sometimes it feels a little bit bureaucratic when you want to sit down and say, okay, I want to know how your goals and my goals link. What are we doing together? When are they going to happen? How do we measure them? Are they quantified? Are they timely? And are they all well understood? But frankly, if you don't spend the time up front making sure that the entire organization is aligned to, these are the things we're trying to get done, here's how all of it kind of falls out into individual accountabilities, and this is how we know when things are working well and when they aren't, and how we can correct. That upfront planning isn't bureaucracy at all. It's really the beauty of how it all really comes together. And
Well,
I
one
think
thing
that
we've
that's
noticed. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Howard.
no, and I think that's been the one thing throughout my career. It's funny, when you are an ROTC student, you learn the 5-paragraph operations order. I know you know it well. And that kind of basic framework has been something that has suited me for my entire career. I don't talk about it that way anymore, but it certainly was a powerful framework for me to start.
One thing we've noticed at Franklin Covey, organizations spend a lot of time working on strategy, and you just talked about goal setting and alignment and all of that, which is extremely valuable. But sometimes it then becomes, we go from strategy to execution of strategy, or performance, if you will, and it often will feel, for some leaders listening to this, perhaps a bit like a black box. Like, I put time and energy and pour money into it and resources, and sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But the reality is that there's some things you can do operationally. And as an operator for many years now, what have you learned about what happens in that black box of performance that can make all the difference?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think a couple of things. I think one is, basic tracking of goals is important, right? And so we all agree on what it is we need to accomplish and when we're going to do it. And then if it goes into a folder and never gets referred to again until the annual plan review, where I tell you whether you succeeded or failed, it's not a real goal. So the first thing is, you spend all this time creating, to your point, here's the strategy and here's what we're going to go do, and then we're going to put it on the shelf, and then we're going to hope we did it. Versus, here's the strategy and here's what we're going to go do, and then we're going to talk about it, and we're going to use those goals as the basis for the things that we do, the meetings that we have, the discussions that occur, the feedback that happens, and check-ins along the way. And so what I found, at least very quickly, is that the more you talk about your goals and whether you're hitting them, the more likely you are to hit your goals, because two things happen. One is you're aware of whether you're on track or not, and the second is, when you're not on track, you can ask for help. And that, I think, is something that is not a natural act for many executives at all levels in organizations to say, I'm off track because something happened. I'm off track because I executed what I promised I would, and the consumer voted differently. Happens all the time. I'm off track because competition did something, and based on that, I need help. And what the organization figures out is, well, if competition did something, maybe we need to respond differently. But how do we course correct and get back on the objectives that we all share? Because if you think about it, me missing my goals by definition in an integrated organization means you're going to miss yours. So why wouldn't it be better if we talked about what I need to get back on track and what we need to do together to make sure that we then deliver what was on the expectation?
I totally get the idea, and I've been in these meetings, and probably people listening to this have as well, where you're in a meeting doing a planning session, and then 6 months or a year later, fast forward, and you feel like you're right back in the same room talking about the same thing because the goals aren't real, they aren't alive, or they're rolled up easel pad paper that's stuck behind the cabinet, or the 3-ring binder that nobody opens, all those type of cliches, but they are grounded in some truth. But then you mentioned something about, not only do I have to keep this thing alive, but I also have to be willing to ask for help. And I just want to hit pause and talk about help a little bit, because sometimes we think as the leader, or certainly the more senior leader, that we're supposed to have the answers. And if I ask for help, does that show something about what I don't know that might be used as a weapon against me later on, or erode my credibility? But you said it a couple times, so let's talk. Talk to me a little bit about help, asking for help, and why it's so important.
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, it's funny. So the role that I historically would have played is considered a general management position, right? And so if you think about what a general manager does, is that the title basically will tell you, I am not the expert in R&D, research and development. I'm not the expert in sales. I'm not the expert in supply chain. I'm not the expert in marketing. I'm probably not the expert in data science. And I'm certainly not the expert in HR, but yet I'm accountable for all of those things, right? And so I think one of the things that I have become very comfortable with is the notion of conceding that I don't know what I don't know, right? What I'm good at is asking questions and creating the preconditions for those experts to come forward with what they know how to do and try and assemble ourselves into a team so that the collective capability of the team allows us to meet and exceed our goals. When you start with I know I'm not the expert, as a leader, you give other people permission to concede the same thing. Number one. Number two is, it is entirely possible that what is required for me to meet my goals exceeds what I'm capable of doing by myself. If we have to hit our revenue goals and our profit goals, and some years, the way that you're going to hit your profit goal is by spending more money. You've got to go find it. That means the marketer needs to count on the supply chain person to go find savings that we can reinvest to hit our goals. Some years, it may mean that the marketer has to sell more so that the supply chain guy can produce what they need to produce to hit our goals. It all kind of works in balance, right? And so as soon as you create teams that can talk to each other about what needs to happen, the more likely that creative problem solving can occur and that help can be given. But I've never bought the idea that, conceding that you don't know something somehow makes you less than or inferior. I think in some cases, it's pretty obvious when people don't know the answer to a question, and it would be better, the old, better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than open it and remove all doubt, right?
Exactly.
Typically in jobs I have, you're exposed anyway, so you might as well just concede you don't know, and then ask for the help of your team that you've spent the time building, constructing, trusting, and believing in, and creating the cultural cohesion you need to grow.
Well, I want to ask you two things about what you just talked about. One was about the exposed component, and then I'll circle back around and talk about the interaction of teams or interconnection of teams. So the exposed part, I don't know if you remember, but you told me a number of years ago, I'll try to set you up for this, see if you recall this, but you said, I have a bit of a red complexion sometimes. My face can get a little bit red. And you said that sometimes people would interpret that to mean that you're angry or frustrated or upset, and they'd say, like, what's going on with Howard? And you referred to it as like people will create a caricature about you as a leader and start to fill in the blanks. I think this is so insightful. And because all of us at some level care what other people think about us. Talk about that. How do you manage that? What do you think about it? Just kind of share that idea.
Yeah, it's funny. I tell this story all the time that you, at some point in your career, you lose the right to decide who you are as a person, because most people who interact with you only interact with you in a glancing blow in one meeting, just occasionally, and there is a backdrop occurs, right? So I had moved to Chicago. I'm a New Yorker by both training and disposition. So I walk fast, I talk fast, and I am red complected. And so I can walk around with a frown on my face and beat red because I'm just late to a meeting, or I'm, just winded from walking up a set of stairs, and you can see people going, man, Howard is really mad. And I used to watch people pull away from the table as I would be walking down, no matter whether I was in a good mood, making a joke, having or what have you. And what became real to me very early, and this is to your point, you are the caricature that the team builds, because we all have confirmation biases. So if you think I'm irritable, you see me red face, you're like, he's mad. And so you lose the right to really own who you are in some ways as it relates to the team. And so you have to find ways and be self-aware enough to understand that how you conduct yourself and what you do in meetings and how you interact with people all builds to that character, and you need to be self-aware of that fact. And I think the other thing, at least for me, has been I do use humor as a way to cut the distance between me and my teams at times. And especially when things get a little bit more heated, you will hear me use some humor, which some people like, we're having a very serious conversation about serious things. Why are you making a joke? And it's like, well, because at some point humans can't simultaneously be tense and laugh. So if you want to cut the tension and get people back on the task, it's a good way to do it. And at least for me, I've long since surrendered trying to tell people, no, you just don't understand me, because I am who you think I am, because I am who they tell me I am.
Was that a hard thing for you to get to? Because I can see I imagine other people would at times like wrestle with that, because I've had that situation myself, especially earlier on in my career. Oftentimes when I'm thinking, I kind of have this resting face that looks kind of intense, and then somebody will say, what's Patrick mad? I'm like, I'm not mad. I'm just kind of thinking about something or whatever it might be. And I found it sometimes you get a little defensive because you're like, no, that's not me. Let me make sure you know who I am. But how did you get to the point where you kind of surrendered that? And what did that look like or feel like?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can't tell you that I can point to the exact day, but I do remember I've had an executive coach over the years, and every so often I have spoken with her, and I'm like, I just don't understand why they don't understand. And the conversation of, well, you're the constant here, right? So maybe you just need to accept the fact that things are different than you think they are. But I think, ultimately for me, I found that me resisting got in the way of my leadership style, of my teaching method, of my team's ability to be effective. And there's nothing I won't do to make my team more effective, right? I mean, nothing, personally, professionally, because I know that all of our success is predicated on the team's success. And so if it was me conceding that their caricature of me or their perception of me was real, I wasn't going to fight it. I was just going to accept it, right? But the other thing that I also did, because I'm me, is I started telling people, hey, listen, we're going to work together. And I have an operating manual of working with Howard. It's not exactly a manual, but I have here's what you can expect from me when we work together, right? You'll always know what I think. I always want to know what you think. I don't mind conflict. If we need to have a conflict, let's argue the position, keep it professional, and then be over it. There's no meeting after the meeting. You can't execute a career limiting step by speaking freely with me about a topic that we're trying to solve. By the way, I walk fast, I talk fast, I turn red, and you're going to think I'm pissed off, and that's just kind of who I am, right? And so when you see it, you offset the confirmation bias a little bit with, well, he told me. And the other thing that becomes true is if you'll disclose those kinds of things early, they also, generally speaking, I've found that my coworkers, my partners, my seniors and subordinates will then concede it and deflect it and accept your word on things that are more important than whether or not you're red-faced like I am.
It's funny you mentioned that idea of like, here's what it's like to work with Howard. Here's the operating manual. The first time I had a leader where I joined the team and that leader basically provided that to me, like, here's what it's like to work with me. And they asked me to do that same exercise to say, here's what it's like to work with Patrick type of thing. It was a little odd to do it, to be honest with you, because it required a lot of self-reflection and even prompted me to go, why am I that way? Or why do I behave that way? And all those type of things. But it's a really great exercise. Do you actually ask the people you work with to do the same exercise? Not only what it's like to work with Howard, but them telling you what it's like to work with them?
Yeah, for sure. Look, shared expectations are the root of all productive relationships, right? And so you're right. The first time you do it is, well, why am I like that? And, without getting into everyone needs to go to therapy or you need a coach or whatever, go talk to somebody who knows and loves you. They'll tell you exactly what you're like, right? And typically in very direct and hurtful but productive ways, right? And then you can, I've never tried to really go deep into the psychology of it, but rather into what I'm trying to find is what is the common connection that we're going to build together that can make us productive as a team, right? I mean, if we went back all the way to sitting on our couches at Fort Bragg, right? There were different personalities in that room of all variety, and everything you were trying to do is to probe to what's the connection that I can provide to this person to help them get to their goals while they're helping me do the same thing. And that's been true my whole career. I would tell you, I'd love to tell you I'm really good at it, but I would tell you I'm probably a solid C, maybe C minus, because it's not a perfect art, right?
Oh, so true. Howard, you mentioned a couple times, you said, I'd do anything anything to help my teams win, something like that is what you said. You mentioned earlier about teams working together, and teams are such a critical thing. And what have you learned about creating an organization, creating an environment where those silos aren't going up, or where at least we're trying to be cognizant of them and bring them down? Because ultimately it is an interdependent type of relationship among teams. What have you learned about that the listeners could benefit from?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I'll tell you, it is an exhausting and never-ending pursuit, right? Like, it's hard. And that's, I mean, honestly, joking aside, that's why people like you do what you do for a living, right? Is that it is hard. It's hard work, and it is seldom perfect. And, typically is best done with a facilitator, first of all. Because no matter what, if I get up in front of the room to try and build this team and say, don't think of me as the leader, human beings can't conceive of negatives. So don't think of Abraham Lincoln. We all got him right now. So don't think of me as a leader, where I'm just here to facilitate. Doesn't, number one, work. Second, it's always the little things that start in relationships. And so I actually always start with norms. How do we meet? How often do we meet? Are our cameras now in the world of Zoom? And I'll tell you a funny story in a second, but I have distraction-free meetings. Laptops down, phones off, sit down. We'll take breaks if we need to. You have 24 hours to respond to each other's emails. You have 36 hours to resolve a conflict. And you spend your first couple of hours just talking about how are we going to interact as humans before you even start the rest of it, right? Pre-reads. I insist on pre-reads, not because I like to torture my team, but because I have introverts and extroverts, right? And if we want to be decision makers, introverts need time to think, and extroverts can always tell you what they've decided before they even finish speaking. And there's nothing worse in a meeting than when the introvert's like, I'm not sure, and the extrovert's, why can't you decide already? So, talking about how do we work together and decide things, what are we accountable for together? Like, what are the things that you're going to do? What are the things that I'm going to do? But what are the things that we have to do together? Succession planning, advancement planning, evaluations. Like, what is it that is not in the purview of any one single person? How are we going to disagree, right? Is that okay? Or am I throwing you under the bus when I call out a mistake? How do you concede when you've made a mistake? But you spend the early days like laying out the norms, and for about the first 6 months, the norms are posted in the meeting room. And if you don't hit the pre-read in advance, we don't discuss it in the meeting because you want to show people that you're serious. but it's that kind of work almost always is more important than, do you know how to make a good potato chip? Did you order the right oil? Did the marketing work? It's the interpersonal things that get in the way. And so we spend a lot of time there. And then we spend a lot of time talking about what are the most important things. So accountability and empowerment, right? Accountability is, do I know what's expected of me? Do I have the tools to do it? Am I rewarded accordingly? Right? Empowerment is, do I have the tools, and will you really let me decide? Right? And those two things have to go together, because empowerment without accountability is recklessness, right? And accountability without empowerment is, I don't exactly know what it is, but infuriating, right? I didn't even get to decide. And so a lot of what are those things that we want this team to be known for? What's our appetite for risk, and what are the iconic actions of leaders to encourage and point the organization to, these are the behaviors that we're talking about, because they were rewarding. I used to do a whole "so you failed" presentation on like some of my best failures, and there are several.
How long was that presentation?
About 14 days.
As an offsite for your families.
That's exactly right.
I was just thinking about this as we were talking about teams, because organizations are made up of teams. There's teams at every level. Some people are maybe listening to this podcast and they're early on in their career, whatever role they might be in, they're a member of a team, and then maybe they're looking to be more of a formal leader of a team, and then they lead multiple teams. And then ultimately, as if they have a desire to do it and can continue to move through, ultimately they might get to the top team of the organization, if you will, from a hierarchical perspective. The team you're on right now, the team you lead, what have you learned when you get to that top of the functional area and you progress into the C-suite? What have you learned about being a member of a team or a leader of a team that maybe you need to lead outside of that room when you come into the room of the senior most team?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that's always surprising to everyone is how little the top team actually does, which, is a good laugh line, right? But in terms of like, what is it that what the top team is ultimately responsible for, and what is the work of that team, is not what I think people think. I've never ascribed to the great big giant head to steal third rock from the sun theory of leadership, right? You're all lucky I'm here. I'm going to tell you what to do. And in fact, that the top teams generally don't do a lot of work and don't do a lot of things. What they do is deploy resources, manage expectations, create the preconditions for the people who do the work to be successful. And that requires a great deal of both empathy for what the organization is trying to do, and courage to let the people subordinate actually do the work. And being very clear and making sure that you really do understand the problems that are happening. Because the ivory tower is a real thing, right? We all get together and we all start talking, and we know about 50% of what's going on in any given topic, but we are 100% certain we know what's going on, right? And that math equation doesn't work. You take 8 people, each 50% right 100% of the time is challenging. And then we all go out and tell everyone what they should be doing. And, the immediate response from the actual work teams are, these guys are totally out of touch. Right. And so, I think what we spend a lot of time doing is trying to be intentional about one thing, which is, what is it that the organization needs from us as a team to make it more capable and more likely to meet and exceed its goals? Like, what is it? Is it resources? Is it support? Sometimes it's a hug, sometimes it's a kick. Like, what is it in any given time to make people be able to meet and exceed their goals? And that's not what subordinate teams do. Subordinate teams come in saying, okay, what is it we need to do today, right? What is it that we need to get done tomorrow? And we're much more, I think, conceptual, because our jobs are more conceptual.
Well, as we wrap up this conversation, let's go from conceptual to very practical, if you don't mind. Share with folks who are listening, whether they're new in their career or they're somewhere along the way, they aspire to go to the C-suite in their role, whatever it is, the next thing that they're trying to do. What's like a piece of advice that you feel is like a pretty solid piece of advice that no matter where they are on their journey, it'd probably be good to kind of keep this in mind?
Yeah. So, I always tell people 2 things. First of all, take risk. Right. And I don't mean recklessness, and I don't mean irresponsible things, but embrace the fact that if you want to continue to climb in your career, you have to embrace the fact that you're going to be uncomfortable. and that, risk is just the way things are, right? We often in our careers want to be certain. And, I want to make sure I'm right, in air quotes. I want to make sure that I know exactly what I'm going to do. I want to know that the outcome is going to be what I expect it to be. And that is just not the way the world works. You have to be, comfortable with the idea that, I tell people I want to be 80% right 100% of the time. I never want to spend the time getting to the point where I know everything, because by then you're too slow. And I also realize that risk is just inherent. And so embrace it, own it, be comfortable with it, know that you're going to fail. I'm only partially kidding about 14 days. It's on a solid 11. But it's, embrace the idea that risk is present, and that's okay. What you do with it, how you manage it, is the point. And I am firmly of the opinion that the people who are willing to tackle the hardest challenges, the hardest topics, the hardest businesses, at least through the course of my career, that has been the case for me, are the ones who tend to become more comfortable with that idea and tend to be more successful. Most of us don't go out trying to be me someday. It just kind of is a happy accident. But what does happen is just through a series of decisions, you get the opportunity to take risks, and they tend to work out.
Well, Howard, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us today. I know the listeners will definitely benefit from it. And, I don't think you just got there by accident. I've known you for so long. I've watched what you've done. I've been impressed in so many ways. And I just wish you all the best in your future, in your career. And let's just continue to stay in touch. Thanks for joining us today.
Yep. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate the kind words. And back at you, it's always good to see you.
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, buddy.
Well, folks, that's all we have for today. Big thanks to Howard Friedman for coming in and talking to us about what he's learned along his leadership journey. I really enjoyed the conversation, and the insights he provided are very practical ways that you can develop as a leader, regardless of where you are in your career. That's all we have for today. Thanks so much for joining me. My name's Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.